This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that still looks stable right up until the moment it isn't. A system that can absorb shock after shock as long as no one asks what's quietly changing underneath. Right now, something fundamental is being traded away. Not loudly, not illegally, systematically. You're told this is strength. You're told this is security. You're told this is strategy. But empires don't fail when they're weak. They fail when they're strong enough to postpone reality. What's happening now isn't the start of a crisis. It's the confirmation of a phase one that always feels survivable while it's happening. If you stay with me, I'm not going to predict collapse. I'm going to show you a pattern that doesn't care what we believe. Because once you see where this phase always leads, the question stops being what happens next and becomes how much time is left. And that's where this gets uncomfortable. Here's the mistake we're trained to make. We look for villains, we look for leaders, we look for moments where someone decided this. But the system running things now doesn't respond to belief or intention or speeches. It responds to math. What actually governs the system is obligation, layered promises, compounding commitments, spending that cannot stop without breaking what already exists. At a certain scale, the system stops asking what is sustainable and starts asking only what keeps it moving. Growth becomes maintenance. Maintenance becomes survival. This is why personalities don't matter as much as we think. They rotate. The incentives stay. Every decision begins to point in the same direction. Not because it's smart, but because every other direction is immediately painful. So the system chooses delay. It chooses extension. It chooses anything that pushes consequences forward. And from the inside, this still feels like control. Budgets pass, markets function, life goes on. But beneath that calm surface, the center of gravity has shifted. And once that happens, the next phase doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. The most dangerous changes don't arrive as shocks. They arrive as adjustments. At first, nothing feels different. The system still works. Paychecks clear, stores stay stocked, markets open on time. But quietly, the reference point shifts. Before, prosperity came from making things, from producing value faster than promises accumulated, from growth that paid for itself. Now, prosperity comes from keeping flows alive, from refinancing yesterday's commitments with tomorrow's expectations, from treating continuation as success. This transition didn't happen overnight. It was normalized, year by year, budget by budget, crisis by crisis. Each step felt reasonable in isolation. Each extension framed as temporary, each exception justified as necessary. And that's the trick. Slow change doesn't trigger alarm. It trains tolerance. By the time the system depends on delay, delay feels like stability. By the time maintenance replaces creation, no one remembers when that happened. But history is ruthless about this phase, because once production stops leading, every solution starts borrowing from the future. And the future, eventually, pushes back. That push doesn't start where people are looking. It starts somewhere much harder to admit. Then something happens that looks decisive. Clean, fast, assertive. From the outside, it's framed as action, a response, a show of control in an uncertain world. But if you zoom out, it isn't a turning point. It's a tell. Because when a system reaches this phase, it stops trying to fix imbalance internally. It looks outward instead, for assets, for guarantees, for something solid enough to lean on. What you're seeing isn't expansion, it's substitution. Real value is being pulled in to support structures that no longer generate enough of it on their own. Hard assets replacing credibility. Force replacing confidence. This moment is often misunderstood as strength. It's presented as necessary, strategic, even overdue. But historically, this is where acceleration begins. Not collapse yet. Acceleration, because this move doesn't solve the underlying equation. It only delays its exposure. And delay has a cost. The longer it works, the more it has to work again, which means the next move won't be optional. It will be bigger, and it will arrive sooner than expected. Here's the part that rarely gets explained cleanly. At this stage, the system isn't mismanaged. It's trapped. The promises already made require more output than the system can produce without disruption. Cut spending, and something breaks immediately. Raise revenue, and growth slows. Admit the gap, and confidence cracks. So the system chooses the only path that preserves the appearance of continuity. It converts credibility into leverage. It turns future value into present liquidity. It leans on assets that don't need belief to function. This is how damage gets distributed without being named. Those closest to the source of money feel it last. Those farthest away absorb it first. Prices rise, but unevenly. Assets inflate, but selectively. Risk concentrates quietly in places that don't look risky yet. And the people benefiting aren't villains. They're positioned upstream. They move with the incentives. This is why inequality widens fastest here. Not because of greed, because the system now rewards proximity, not productivity. From the inside, this still feels manageable. Complex, but manageable. From the outside, the shape is already familiar. And once you recognize that shape, you start to see what the next stress point has to be. Because the mechanism that delays collapse also guarantees escalation. Now the pace changes. Signals start stacking. Not headlines, pressures. Costs don't spike all at once. They creep, then they stop retreating. Every response buys less time than the last one did. Every intervention needs to be larger to feel the same. The system starts reacting faster than it can explain itself. Shorter cycles, thinner margins. Confidence becomes conditional. It's there until it isn't. Small disruptions no longer stay small. They echo, they travel. What once would have been absorbed now requires coordination. What once could be localized now spills outward. This is where volatility stops being an event and becomes an environment. Decisions are made under pressure, but always in the same direction. More support, more leverage, more delay. From the inside, this looks like responsiveness. From the outside, it looks like acceleration. And here's the dangerous part. The system hasn't failed, which is exactly why people stop preparing for failure. But history is very clear about this phase. When stabilization starts requiring speed, something is about to outrun control. And when that happens, the next break doesn't announce itself. It just shows up. This is where it stops being abstract. Because you don't experience systems, you experience outcomes. You feel it in time, not theory. Bills that reset higher, savings that stop stretching as far as they used to, plans that require constant adjustment. Nothing collapses. That's the unsettling part. Instead, everything gets thinner. Margins, passions, room for error. You're told this is normal, temporary, the cost of stability. But stability shouldn't feel like erosion. The gap isn't dramatic enough to trigger panic, yet it's persistent enough to change behavior. You wait longer. You hedge more. You trust less. And the system notices, because this phase feeds on adaptation. The more people absorb quietly, the more pressure the system can apply without breaking. If this feels familiar, that's not coincidence. It's design, not conspiracy. If you're still here, pay attention to that instinct. The one that says something important is being deferred. Because the next phase doesn't start with policy. It starts with people adjusting faster than institutions can. And once that line is crossed, reversal becomes very hard. At this point, the system stops being local. Pressures that once stayed contained begin to synchronize, not because anyone planned it, but because the same incentives now exist everywhere. Capital becomes cautious, not scared, selective. It moves where rules feel lighter, where commitments feel optional, where tomorrow looks less encumbered than yesterday. This isn't panic. It's pattern recognition. Trade starts routing around friction. Agreements get rewritten without ceremony. Dependencies quietly loosen. Nothing snaps. It drifts. And drift is hard to argue with because no single decision looks destabilizing on its own. But taken together, these shifts change the map. What once felt central starts to feel heavy. What once felt permanent starts to feel conditional. This is how systems lose gravity, not through collapse, but through alternatives becoming easier to imagine. From the inside, it still looks like leadership. From the outside, it looks like hedging. And that difference matters. Because once enough actors stop assuming permanence, every move becomes provisional. And provisional systems don't behave the way stable ones do. They react, and reaction always accelerates the next phase. From here, the future doesn't narrow to one outcome. It splits. There are three paths systems like this can take. The first is adjustment. Slow, managed, politically painful. Promises are reduced, expectations reset, losses are admitted instead of postponed. This path preserves function, but only by confronting limits directly. History shows it's rare because it demands sacrifice before collapse forces it. The second is erosion. This is more familiar. Value leaks instead of breaks. Currencies weaken gradually. Living standards decline unevenly. Nothing fails, but everything costs more effort to sustain. This path can last years, even decades. And that's what makes it dangerous. People adapt all the way down. The third path is rupture. Confidence snaps. A trigger appears financial, political, or external. Trust evaporates faster than policy can respond. What was delayed arrives all at once. The system hasn't chosen yet, and that's the point. Because the longer a system avoids choice, the more it drifts toward the path it can't control. And right now, all three are still technically possible, which means the most important variable isn't policy, it's timing. Here's what makes this moment dangerous. There is no alarm, no clear signal that says now. Systems like this don't end with a sound. They end with a realization too late that the rules changed earlier. Nothing you've heard here requires panic. That's not how this works. It requires attention because the risk isn't collapse tomorrow. It's assuming permanence in a phase defined by delay. When systems reach this point, they don't ask permission to change. They respond to pressure quietly, incrementally. Then suddenly, if you're still watching, it's because some part of you already understands that. That sense that something essential is being traded for time, don't ignore that. Stay curious. Stay precise. Follow the incentives, not the reassurances. This story isn't over. It's moving. And in the next stage, the difference between being early and being late isn't ideological. It's material. If you want to know what to watch, what actually signals acceleration, that's what we'll go into next. Because once those indicators surface, there is no rewind, only position